There are moments a man remembers long after the gun smoke fades, not because of who died, but because of the second he realized staying silent would have made him just as guilty. For Elias Rook, that moment came during the hottest summer Ford County had seen in years. Kansas heat rolled across the plains like fire that afternoon in 1884. Dust drifted over the dry grass outside Dodge City. Even the cattle barely moved beneath the sun. Folks with any sense stayed near shade during hours like that. But trouble didn't care much about the weather, because out in Ford County, evil men usually waited for the hottest days to do their worst work. Whitcomb Ranch sat alone near the Pawnee River, surrounded by tired fencing, thirsty pasture, and a barn that badly needed fresh boards before winter. Thomas Whitcomb had ridden into Dodge City early that morning. His wife had gone to Fort Dodge 2 days earlier to care for her sick sister. That left 21-year-old Mara Whitcomb alone on the ranch, except for a young stable boy who'd been sent away before noon by a stranger carrying a fake delivery order. By the time Mara realized the order was fake, 3 riders were already crossing her father's land. Everybody in Ford County recognized the Voss family. Gideon Voss rode in front, old but still dangerous, dressed cleaner than most ranchers could afford. His 2 sons followed close behind him. Preston Voss looked calm and cold, the kind of man who smiled without warmth. Lyle Voss looked mean enough to start a fight just to feel alive. They carried hunting rifles across their saddles, pretending they were only chasing birds along the river. But nobody rides onto a lonely ranch with 3 rifles unless they expect trouble. But Mara knew better the second they rode into her yard. Gideon removed his hat politely, almost like a gentleman visiting neighbors after church. Then he asked her to sign a paper. Mara didn't even bother reading it. She already knew what they wanted. The Southern water rights. That small spring near the grazing field was worth more than cattle during a Kansas drought. Without water, small ranchers died slow. Without water, rich men bought land cheap. And everybody in Ford County knew exactly what happened to ranchers who kept saying no. Gideon smiled when Mara refused. He told her the Whitcomb Ranch already owed too much money. He told her her father was making dangerous accusations in Dodge City. Then his voice turned colder. You ought to think carefully before standing against people stronger than you. Mara still refused. That was when the polite masks disappeared. Preston grabbed her arm first. Lyle laughed while pulling the paper from her hands. Mara slapped him hard enough to surprise all 3 men. For 1 second, the whole yard went silent. Then Lyle shoved her into the dirt beside the horse pens. Dust covered her white dress. Preston pinned one arm behind her back while Gideon stood over her like a judge already certain of the verdict. Mara fought hard, harder than they expected. She kicked, scratched, tried reaching for the shotgun hanging near the barn door, but there were too many of them, and nobody nearby would have dared interfere with the Voss family anyway. That was the ugliest part of Ford County. Everybody knew who the wolves were. Most people simply prayed the wolves picked another ranch. Gideon crouched near Mara and held the paper close to her face. Sign it now, he said softly. Mara spat dirt and told him to go to hell. Lyle grabbed both her wrists and forced her down harder. Then Mara screamed. Not the kind of scream people made during arguments. This one sounded raw, desperate. The kind of sound that carried across open land and stayed inside a man's head long after hearing it. Nearly half a mile away, Elias Rook pulled his horse to a stop beside the trail. He'd spent most of the morning tracking unusual hoof prints leading away from a stolen cattle route near Cimarron Crossing. The tracks had brought him close to Whitcomb Ranch before disappearing near the riverbank. At first, Elias planned to keep riding toward Dodge City, and he wasn't looking for another fight. Truth was, Elias Rook had spent too many years around bad towns and bad men, long enough to know rich men usually became cruel once nobody challenged them anymore. Then he heard the scream again. Elias slowly turned his horse toward the ranch. By the time he reached the fence line, he saw everything. The terrified young woman in the dirt, the rich old rancher standing above her, the 2 grown men holding her down while laughing beneath the Kansas sun. For a long moment, Elias said nothing. His eyes studied the yard carefully. 3 rifles, 2 revolvers, 1 wagon near the gate, no other riders nearby. Even angry men made mistakes when they felt powerful. and the Voss family looked very comfortable at that moment. Elias climbed down from his saddle slowly, boots crunching dry dirt, one hand resting near the old colt hanging low on his hip. Lyle noticed him first. Preston turned next. Then Gideon looked toward the ranch gate with annoyance, like some stray traveler had interrupted business. "You lost, mister?" Gideon asked. Elias didn't answer right away. His eyes stayed on Mara. Dust covered her face. Fear sat in her eyes. But there was anger there, too, the kind that refused to surrender completely. That mattered to Elias more than beauty ever could. Finally, the gunslinger spoke. His voice came out low and cold enough to stop the whole yard. "Release her." Nobody moved. The wind pushed dust between them. Then Preston reached for his revolver. Big mistake. Elias drew first. The Colt appeared in his hand so fast Mara barely saw it happen. Preston froze the second the barrel pointed directly at his chest. Lyle cursed and charged forward instead. He was younger, bigger, and stupid enough to think anger won fights. Elias stepped sideways and drove a hard punch into Lyle's ribs. The younger man stumbled. A second hit sent him crashing face first into the horse trough. Water exploded across the dirt. Gideon finally lost his smile. For the first time that afternoon, the old rancher realized the stranger standing in his yard wasn't bluffing. And deep down, Elias already understood something too. Men like the Voss family never rode onto lonely ranches for just one reason. So the real question was this: what terrible thing had Thomas Whitcomb discovered before disappearing into Dodge City? Lyle Voss groaned face down in the horse trough while muddy water dripped from his hair. For a second, nobody moved. The Kansas wind rolled through the yard, carrying dust between the fences and the barn. Preston still stood frozen with Elias Rook's Colt aimed square at his chest. Gideon Voss slowly raised both hands a little, not because he was scared yet, but because smart rich men knew when not to push too far, especially around armed strangers with dead eyes. Mara pushed herself up from the dirt. Her dress was stained brown now. One side of her face carried a fresh scrape from the ground. Still, she stood straight. That caught Elias's attention more than anything else. Gideon forced a dry smile back onto his face. "No need for blood over family discussion," he said. Elias didn't lower the Colt. "Funny kind of discussion," he replied. Lyle finally climbed up from the trough, coughing water and cursing under his breath. He reached for the revolver near his belt again. Big mistake. Elias shifted the Colt toward him without even looking. Lyle froze immediately. That told everybody in the yard something important. This wasn't some drunk cowboy wandering through Kansas. This man had done this before, many times. Gideon studied Elias carefully now. Old coat covered in trail dust, sunburned face. Calm hands, no shaking, no wasted motion. Men like that usually carried graves behind them. Gideon tipped his hat slightly. "You just made yourself a powerful enemy, mister." Elias finally holstered the Colt. "Get off her ranch." The old rancher stared at him another second before turning toward the wagon. But before climbing aboard, Gideon looked at Mara one last time. "You tell your father this county belongs to men who know how business works." Then the Voss family rode away beneath the afternoon sun. Nobody in the yard relaxed until the wagon disappeared down the trail. Only then did Mara's knees almost give out. Elias caught her arm before she hit the ground. "You hurt bad?" he asked. Mara shook her head once, mostly angry. That pulled a tired little smile from Elias. He picked up the paper Gideon dropped in the dirt. Most of it looked like legal nonsense written by somebody trying too hard to sound important. But one line mattered: transfer of Southern water access rights. Elias looked toward the dry pasture behind the ranch house, then toward the cattle standing near empty troughs. Now the whole thing made sense. This wasn't about insulting a ranch girl. This was about water. And out west, water mattered almost as much as bullets. Mara brushed dirt from her sleeves and tried to steady herself. "They've been coming around for weeks," she admitted. "My father kept telling them no." Elias handed her the paper. "What did your old man do to make Gideon Voss this nervous?" Mara hesitated. That told Elias the answer probably wasn't small. Finally, she motioned toward the house. Inside, The Whitcomb home looked modest but clean. A Bible sat near the window beside an old coffee tin full of bills and receipts. The place smelled like fresh bread and dust. For reasons Elias couldn't explain, the little ranch house reminded him of the kind of life he'd stopped believing belonged to men like him. Honestly, it reminded Elias of homes he'd almost forgotten he missed. For the first time in years, the ranch didn't feel like somebody else's life anymore. Mara poured water into a basin to clean the scrape on her cheek. Elias stood near the kitchen doorway, watching the windows out of habit. Men like the Voss family rarely rode away peacefully forever. "My father sells cattle through Dodge City," Mara explained. "3 shipments in a row came back lighter than they should have." Elias frowned. "Lighter? The scales at the stockyard keep saying our cattle weigh less than before." She gave a bitter laugh. "My father spent 30 years raising cattle. Suddenly we're supposed to believe they all shrunk crossing Kansas." That one actually pulled a rough chuckle out of Elias, because every rancher west of Missouri knew exactly what that meant. Crooked scales, one of the oldest tricks in cattle country. A rich stockyard owner shaved weight off every herd passing through. Small ranchers lost money. Then came the loans. Then came the debt. Then came men like Gideon Voss offering to buy struggling land cheap. Slow robbery worked better than guns most days. And the worst part was, most folks in Dodge City already knew it. They were just too scared to say it out loud. "My father started asking questions in Dodge City," Mara continued. "He left this morning to speak with a freight clerk near the rail yard." Elias looked toward the empty chair beside the table. "And he hasn't come back." Mara shook her head. The room grew quiet. Outside, thunder rumbled somewhere far across the plains. Kansas storms always sounded angry before they arrived. Elias walked toward the front porch and studied the ranch again. Wheel tracks near the barn, fresh horse prints beside the fence. Too many for a simple hunting trip. The Voss family had been watching this place before today. That bothered him. A lot. "You got neighbors close enough to help?" he asked. Mara leaned against the doorway. "Close enough to hear screaming." That answer said everything. Ford County had become the kind of place where decent people survived by pretending not to notice evil. Elias hated towns like that, probably because he'd seen too many.
And if stories like this remind you of the old westerns folks used to sit around listening to supper, go ahead and subscribe to the channel.
There are plenty more dusty trails and hard men waiting ahead. Mara crossed her arms. "You don't have to stay involved, Mr. Elias." She nodded once. "Elias." Then she glanced toward the road where the Voss wagon disappeared earlier. "They'll come back, won't they?" Elias didn't answer right away. Instead, he walked toward the horse trough and crouched near the mud. Most folks would have missed the tracks completely, but not him. 3 wagon horses, 2 extra riders hidden near the cottonwoods earlier, and 1 strange hoof mark he'd already seen near Cimarron Crossing 2 days ago. That stopped him cold. Same damaged horseshoe. Same narrow cut along the edge. The Voss family wasn't only stealing land. Somehow they were connected to the stolen cattle trail Elias had been tracking across Kansas. And suddenly this whole situation became much bigger than one frightened ranch girl. Elias slowly stood. Then he looked toward Mara with a harder expression than before. Because now he understood something dangerous. If Thomas Whitcomb really discovered proof against Gideon Voss, there was a good chance the old rancher wasn't simply delayed in Dodge City. So where exactly had Mara's father disappeared to before sunset reached Ford County? The next day passed slow and tense across Whitcomb Ranch. Elias repaired fencing near the barn while quietly watching the roads. Mara cooked, cleaned, and tried pretending life still felt normal. But every sound of horse hooves made both of them look toward the gate. By sunset the following evening, neither of them had slept much. The sun started dropping lower over Whitcomb Ranch, but the heat still hung heavy across the land. Elias Rook stood beside the fence staring at those hoof prints like they were speaking directly to him. Most men would have seen dirt. He saw trouble. That damaged horseshoe near the trough matched tracks he'd followed outside Cimarron Crossing 2 days earlier. Back then, Somebody had stolen 12 head of cattle from a rancher too poor to fight back. Now the same trail somehow led straight to Gideon Voss. Elias didn't like coincidences. Behind him, Mara lit a lantern inside the house. Its warm glow spilled through the window while thunder rolled farther west across the plains. Storm coming, and storms always made desperate men act faster. Mara stepped onto the porch holding an old Winchester rifle. "You know how to use that?" Elias asked. "Enough to scare somebody. Sometimes that's all you need." That earned a small smile from her, first one he'd seen all day. Honestly, it looked strange on a face covered in dirt and bruises, but tough people usually smiled hardest after bad days. Mara sat on the porch steps while Elias checked the rifle. For a little while, neither of them said much. Sometimes tired people trusted silence more than conversation. "You're not really just passing through, are you?" she asked quietly. Elias handed the gun back. No, he didn't say much more than that. Men his age learned silence kept old ghosts buried. Still, Mara kept looking at him, not scared anymore, curious. That could be dangerous too. Inside the ranch house, Elias found an old wooden box beneath the kitchen table. Bills, cattle receipts, feed orders, the usual ranch problems. Then Mara pulled out a small leather notebook tied with string. "My father kept this hidden from everybody," she said. Elias opened it carefully. Inside were cattle numbers, shipment dates, and rough weight estimates written in faded pencil. Nothing fancy, just ranch math. But old ranchers trusted ranch math more than bankers. Elias studied the numbers for less than a minute before snorting softly. "What?" Mara asked. He was right. She stepped closer. "About what? Your cattle didn't lose weight." Elias pointed toward several pages. "Look here, 3 shipments. Nearly the exact same shortage every time." Mara frowned. "You can tell that already." Elias nodded once. "Crooked scales usually steal in patterns." That made her face tighten with anger again. Not fear this time, anger. Different thing entirely. Outside, the first wind gust rattled the barn doors. Then came hoofbeats, fast. Both of them froze. Elias blew out the lantern immediately. Darkness swallowed the room. More hoofbeats followed near the side pasture. 2 riders at least, maybe 3, Mara whispered. "The Voss family." "Maybe." Elias moved toward the window slowly. Rain smell drifted through the cracks in the walls now. One rider circled toward the barn. The other stopped near the house. Then somebody laughed outside. Not Gideon. Too young. Too drunk. Elias recognized the sound instantly. Men who worked for rich ranchers usually laughed that way right before doing something stupid. A bottle shattered against the side of the barn. Mara jumped slightly. Second bottle. This one carried fire. Flames spread across dry hay almost immediately. "Damn fool," Elias muttered. The barn lit up orange against the dark Kansas sky. Mara grabbed the Winchester. "My horses." Elias caught her arm before she ran outside. "Stay behind me." The 2 riders dismounted near the fire, probably expecting panic instead of resistance. Bad mistake. Elias stepped through the smoke fast and quiet. First man barely turned before Elias slammed him in against the fence hard enough to drop him cold. The second rider pulled a revolver. Mara fired the Winchester into the air from the porch. The blast echoed across the ranch like thunder. That was enough. The gunman panicked and fired wild. Elias rushed him before he could aim again. One hard punch, one elbow to the jaw. Fight over. Honestly, most gunfights ended uglier and dumber than folks imagined. Rain finally started pouring from the sky. Heavy summer rain. Within minutes, the fire shrank into steaming smoke and wet ash. The younger gunman groaned beneath Elias's boot. Mara aimed the Winchester at him with shaking hands. "Who sent you?" she demanded. The man spat mud first. Then he noticed Elias staring down at him without blinking. Sometimes they scared people more when they stayed calm. "Voss said scare the girl," the gunman muttered. "That's all." Elias leaned down slightly. "Where's Thomas Whitcomb?" The man's face changed immediately, and that answered enough already. "He ain't dead," the gunman blurted. Mara inhaled sharply behind the rifle. Elias pressed harder. Then where is he? The cowboy hesitated too long. That usually meant fear, not loyalty. Finally, he swallowed hard. Old storage camp near the Arkansas River. Mara looked like she'd been punched in the stomach. Her father was alive. But alive didn't always mean safe. Rain poured harder across the ranch while thunder shook the sky. Then Elias noticed something else. The gunman kept glancing toward the dark road behind the pasture, like he was terrified somebody else might already be watching them. And a second later, Elias heard fresh horse hooves coming through the storm. The rain came down hard enough to turn the ranch yard into mud within minutes. Lightning flashed across the Kansas sky while Elias Rook slowly turned toward the road behind the pasture. Those incoming hoofbeats weren't moving fast like frightened riders. They sounded steady. Careful. Whoever was coming through that storm wasn't drunk and stupid like the two men lying in the mud. Mara tightened both hands around the Winchester. The captured cowboy looked even more nervous now. Then a lantern appeared through the rain. One rider, older horse, heavy coat. Elias relaxed slightly when he recognized the sheriff's badge shining beneath the water. Sheriff Abel Kincaid pulled his horse to a stop beside the gate and looked around the wrecked yard. Burned hay, mud, one unconscious cowboy, another bleeding beside the fence, and Mara Whitcomb standing barefoot in the rain holding a rifle. Kincaid sighed heavily. "Well," he muttered, "looks like I picked a bad night to stay dry." Honestly, that almost made Mara laugh. Almost. The sheriff climbed down slowly, knees stiff from age and too many years in the saddle. He wasn't a weak man, exactly, just tired. Elias had seen that kind before. Men who started honest, then got worn down little by bad towns and rich people. Kincaid studied the captured cowboy. "Recognize him?" Elias asked. Sheriff nodded once. "Works security near the Voss stockyard sometimes?" That answer told Mara plenty. Kincaid crouched beside the young cowboy. "Who ordered this?" The man stayed quiet. Sheriff looked toward the burned hay pile, then toward Mara's bruised face. His jaw tightened slightly. "Son," he said calmly, "tonight's already ugly enough. Don't make it worse." The cowboy finally broke. "Gideon just wanted the girl scared," he muttered. "Preston said she'd sign the water paper if the ranch got rough enough." Mara looked away into the rain for a second. Not because she was weak, because hearing it out loud made everything feel uglier somehow. Sheriff slowly stood again. "You said Thomas Whitcomb's alive." The cowboy nodded quickly. "Storage camp near Arkansas River." Elias watched Kincaid carefully. This was the moment that mattered. A sheriff either followed truth or followed money. Most western towns only got one decent choice every 10 years. Kincaid removed his wet hat and rubbed his forehead. "Damn it, Gideon." That told Elias plenty, too. The sheriff already suspected more than he'd admitted earlier in Dodge City. Mara stepped closer. "You knew something was wrong, didn't you?" Kincaid didn't answer immediately. Rainwater rolled off the brim of his hat while thunder shook the plains again. Finally, he sighed. "I knew ranchers kept losing money around those cattle scales." His voice sounded older now. "Weren't much I could prove." Elias crossed his arms. "Or maybe nobody wanted proof." The sheriff looked at him hard for a second. Funny thing about older men, sometimes the truth irritated them most because they already knew it. Kincaid glanced toward the captured cowboy. "Bring him inside," he said. A few minutes later, all four of them sat inside the Whitcomb house while rain hammered the roof overhead. Mara poured coffee into chipped cups with slightly shaken hands. Honestly, it felt strange seeing normal kitchen sounds after all that violence outside. That was life out west, though. 1 minute bullet, next minute coffee. Sheriff Kincaid studied Thomas Whitcomb's notebook beneath the lantern light. His expression darkened page by page. "These numbers don't match Voss records," he muttered. "They ain't supposed to," Elias replied. The sheriff looked up slowly. "You know cattle books. I know thieves." That almost pulled another smile from Mara despite the night. Kincaid leaned back heavily in his chair. Then he lowered his voice. "There's something else." Both Elias and Mara looked at him. The Voss family keeps another ledger near the rail yard warehouse. Mara frowned. What kind of ledger? The real cattle weights, freight cuts too. Sheriff rubbed tired eyes before continuing. Gideon hides the honest books there. Public records stay clean, while private records tell the truth. Now things started fitting together fast. Crooked scales, fake debts, water rights, stolen cattle. It wasn't random greed anymore. It was a business. A dirty one. Mara stared at the sheriff. If you knew all this, why didn't you stop them? That one hit harder than the thunder outside. Kincaid looked toward the dark window before answering. My wife got sick 3 winters ago, and Gideon made sure I remembered who paid the bills every time my daughter walked home from church, Kincaid said quietly. His voice softened. Needed doctors from Wichita. Medicine, too. Elias already knew the rest before hearing it. Gideon Voss loaned him money, and men like Gideon always collected eventually. The sheriff looked ashamed, saying it out loud. Honestly, most decent men looked smaller when guilt finally caught them. But Mara surprised Elias then. She placed a fresh cup of coffee beside the sheriff quietly. No lecture, no yelling, just understanding. That probably hurt Kincaid more than anger would have. The old sheriff cleared his throat. I can send a telegram to Fort Dodge tomorrow morning. For who? Mara asked. Deputy U.S. Marshal. Elias nodded slightly. Smart move. If local law belonged to Voss, outside law might not. Then Kincaid looked directly at Elias. But if we're doing this, we need that warehouse ledger first. Silence filled the room. Everybody understood the problem immediately. The warehouse sat right beside the rail yard, and the Voss family guarded it hard, especially at night. Lightning flashed outside again. Mara slowly lifted her eyes toward Elias, and for the first time all evening, she didn't look frightened. She looked ready, which was exactly why Elias suddenly had a very bad feeling about what tomorrow night was going to become, because breaking into Gideon Voss's warehouse was the kind of decision that usually got people buried in Kansas. By the next evening, the storm had passed, but the air over Dodge City still felt heavy and mean. Mud covered the streets, wagons rattled past saloons, cowboys drifted between gambling halls like men trying hard not to think too much, and somewhere near the rail yard, Gideon Voss kept the books that could destroy half the town. Elias Rook sat quietly outside Nora Bell's diner, finishing cold coffee while Mara studied a rough sketch. Sheriff Kincaid drew on a napkin. The warehouse stood beside the freight platform near the Santa Fe line. 2 guards outside most night, 1 clerk sleeping upstairs, and usually Preston Voss checking inventory after dark. Sounds friendly, Elias muttered. That pulled a small laugh from Nora while she wiped down a table nearby. Honestly, Nora reminded Elias of every sharp older woman west of the Mississippi. Women who survived because they saw everything and forgot nothing. She slid a plate toward Mara. You should eat before doing something foolish. Mara looked up. What makes you think this is foolish? Nora snorted softly. Because every important decision in Kansas starts with somebody saying it ain't foolish. Even Elias chuckled at that one. Truth was, tension had sat on Mara's shoulders all day. Not fear exactly, more like pressure. Her father missing, the ranch hanging by a thread, and now she was planning to break into the most dangerous warehouse in Dodge City beside a man she'd only met yesterday. Funny how fast life changed out west. Sheriff Kincaid arrived near sunset wearing plain clothes instead of his badge. Probably smart. Half the town would have warned Gideon if they saw the sheriff helping Elias. Kincaid lowered his voice. Deputy Marshal won't reach town until tomorrow afternoon. Elias nodded. Then tonight mattered even more. The sheriff pointed toward Mara. You stay outside once we get there. Mara folded her arms immediately. No. Kincaid sighed like a tired father arguing with a stubborn daughter. Damn it, girl. I know my father's cattle marks better than anybody. She looked toward Elias. And I can read Preston's bookkeeping codes. My father used to make me help with shipment records after supper. That actually surprised him. Codes, Mara nodded. Preston numbers every ranch shipment different depending on who he's cheating. Now that was interesting. Crooked men always thought they were smarter than everybody else. Night settled over Dodge City soon after. The four of them moved separately toward the rail yard to avoid attention. Steam hissed from parked locomotives while freight workers loaded cargo beneath lantern light. Nobody paid much attention to another tired cowboy walking through Kansas darkness. That suited Elias just fine. From the alley beside the warehouse, he studied the guards carefully. One older man smoking near the door, one younger guard half asleep beside stacked crates. Easy enough. The hard part would be getting back out alive if Preston arrived early. Kincaid stayed behind the stable fence watching the street. Mara waited beside him wearing a brown coat over her dress to avoid attention. Elias slipped around the back of the warehouse alone. Old lock, cheap hinges. Rich men often spent fortunes protecting things while ignoring simple weak spots. A knife blade and a little patience opened the rear door quietly. Inside smelled like dust, rope, oil, and cattle paperwork. Rows of ledgers covered shelves along the walls. Freight tags hung from nails overhead. Elias moved fast. No wasted motion. No panic. Men survived longer that way. Then he heard footsteps upstairs. Clerk probably awake. Wonderful. Elias grabbed several ledgers and carried them toward a lantern near the loading table. Most looked normal. Feed record, shipping invoices, rail schedules. Then he found pages marked with strange symbols beside ranch names, small dots beside poor ranchers, lines beside wealthy buyers, and every Whitcomb shipment showed lower cattle weights than nearby ranches. There it was, proof, outside. Mara suddenly appeared beside the window. She motioned urgently toward one page. Elias slid the ledger closer. Her eyes scanned the numbers quickly. Then she pointed at a freight code near the bottom. "Those cattle don't exist," she whispered through the crack. Elias frowned. "What?" "Those shipment numbers belong to ranches already sold 2 years ago. Now things turned uglier. Way uglier. Gideon wasn't only cheating ranchers. He was laundering stolen cattle through dead ranch accounts. Suddenly the missing cattle near Cimarron Crossing made perfect sense. Then came the sound Elias didn't want to hear. Horse hooves outside, several this time, and one voice barking orders immediately. "Preston Voss." Mara disappeared from the window instantly. Elias blew out the lantern and stepped deeper into the warehouse shadows. Front doors slammed open moments later. Lantern light swept across crates while Preston entered with 2 armed men behind him. "You check upstairs," Preston ordered, "and find that damn ledger." Elias stayed perfectly still behind stacked grain sacks. One guard walked within 6 feet of him, close enough to smell whiskey. Outside, another distraction suddenly exploded across the rail yard. A horse broke loose, screaming through the street, dragging loose rope behind it. Cowboys yelled, crates crashed. For one beautiful second, complete chaos swallowed the yard. "Mara?" Elias almost smiled despite himself. That young woman was learning fast. He moved immediately, quick, silent. One guard dropped unconscious before realizing what happened. The second turned too late and caught a hard punch beneath the jaw, but Preston reacted faster than expected. The rich rancher's revolver cleared leather just as Elias reached the rear door. Gunfire exploded through the warehouse. A bullet smashed through wooden crates beside Elias's head. Then another shot shattered the lantern near Preston. Darkness swallowed the building instantly. Men started yelling. Outside, train whistles screamed through the night. And somewhere inside all that confusion, Elias heard Preston Voss say something that made his blood run cold. "Find the girl first!" Preston Voss shouted for his men to find Mara first. That told Elias Rook everything he needed to know. Men like Preston only threatened people when they were scared of losing control. And for the first time in a very long while, the Voss family was losing it. Outside the warehouse, rainwater still dripped from the rooftops while train smoke rolled across Dodge City. Mara stayed hidden behind stacked freight crates near the rail yard fence. Clutching the ledger pages tightly against her coat, her hand shook. Not because she was weak, because courage usually shakes before it stands firm. That is something most young men never understand. Fear is normal. What matters is what a person does while afraid. Inside the warehouse, another gunshot exploded through the dark. Then came a loud crash. One of Preston's men slammed into a table after Elias drove him across the room hard enough to break the lantern stand. Preston cursed somewhere in the darkness. But Elias already moved toward the rear exit, fast, calm, like a man who'd survived too many ugly nights to panic now. By the time Preston reached the back door, Elias and Mara were already disappearing into the muddy streets beside the rail yard. Sheriff Kincaid met them 2 blocks away near Nora Bell's diner. The old lawman looked exhausted when he saw the ledger pages. Then he read the numbers, and his whole expression changed. There it was. Proof. Real proof. Fake cattle weights, dead ranch accounts, stolen shipments moved through Dodge City under false names. Gideon Voss hadn't simply robbed struggling ranchers. He'd built his fortune stealing from decent people too poor to fight back. Mara leaned against the diner wall quietly while catching her breath. For the first time since Elias met her, she looked tired, not weak, just tired. Most older folks would have recognized that look immediately. Sometimes life doesn't break people all at once. Sometimes it wears them down one ugly day at a time. Sheriff Kincaid folded the ledger pages carefully. "We can finish this tomorrow," he said, but Elias slowly shook his head. "No." Kincaid frowned. "What do you mean, no?" Elias looked toward the dark western plains beyond town. "If Thomas Whitcomb's still alive, Gideon moves him before sunrise." Silence hit all 3 of them, because deep down they all knew he was right. That was the problem with evil men. Once cornered, they stopped pretending. Mara finally spoke softly. "Then we go tonight." Her voice sounded brave. But Elias noticed her hands trembling beside the table. A younger woman probably would have stayed hidden, cried, waited for somebody else to save the day. But Mara Whitcomb had already crossed too much hard ground for that now. Fear changes people. Sometimes it breaks them, and sometimes it finally shows them who they really are. Hours later, 4 riders crossed the dark Kansas plains toward the Arkansas River. Elias, Mara, Sheriff Kincaid, and old Amos Pike, a rancher, who finally admitted the Voss family cheated him too. That matters more than people realize, because evil survives longest when good men stay silent. The abandoned storage camp appeared near sunrise beside the riverbank. Broken fencing, collapsed sheds, and 2 armed guards standing outside a small barn. One quick fight ended things fast. Nobody died. Real strength isn't loving violence. Real strength is knowing exactly when to stop it. Inside the barn, they found Thomas Whitcomb tied to a chair, but still alive. Mara nearly broke down seeing her father, but Thomas looked past her first, straight at Elias. "You the man who stopped Gideon at my ranch." Elias nodded once. Thomas stared quietly for a second. Then he said something simple. "Thank you for not riding away." Honestly, that line probably mattered more to Elias than all the money in Kansas, because lonely men rarely hear words like that. Lyle Voss tried escaping during the confusion, but Sheriff Kincaid caught him near the riverbank before sunrise fully reached the plains. And once the youngest Voss realized his father wasn't coming back for him, he finally talked. Everything came spilling out. The fake cattle books, the stolen herds, the threats, the burned ranches, even the old robbery years ago that destroyed Elias Rook's life. By noon, Dodge City already felt different. Turns out fear doesn't look nearly as strong when somebody finally pushes back. Ranchers who stayed quiet for years suddenly stepped forward. Men who once looked away finally spoke, and Gideon Voss discovered something rich men always forget eventually. Money can buy silence for a while, but it can't bury truth forever. A few months later, Whitcomb Ranch looked alive again. Fresh fencing, healthy cattle, water running through the southern pasture, and for the first time in years, laughter returned to the place. Some mornings, neighbors riding past Whitcomb Ranch could see Elias repairing old fences while Mara carried fresh coffee across the porch. Simple things. But lonely men usually dream about simple things more than anybody else. Elias Rook could have ridden away after all that. Most men like him usually did. But sometimes life gives a tired soul one last chance to belong somewhere. Maybe that was the thing Elias finally understood too late in life. A man is not defined by the worst thing that happened to him. And a hard life does not mean a hopeless life. Sometimes one good decision changes everything. Sometimes helping one frightened person changes your own future too. Maybe that is why old Western stories still matter. Not because of the gunfights, but because they remind people that courage still matters. One decent man refusing to stay silent can still change somebody else's life. And sometimes, if he's lucky, maybe his own life changes too. If you enjoyed this story, let me know down in the comments. I always enjoy hearing which part of the story stayed with you the longest.
And if stories like this help you relax after a long day, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel
so you don't miss the next ride across the old American frontier. One more thing before you go. This story was carefully collected, rewritten, and expanded with a few additional dramatic details to bring stronger educational value, emotional depth, and entertainment to the experience. Some visual scenes, illustrations, thumbnail elements, and emotional moments were enhanced with AI-generated imagery to help bring the old frontier atmosphere closer to life for viewers. Maybe that's what old stories are supposed to do. Remind people that courage still matters. So now I leave you with one final question. If you had been standing at that ranch gate beside Elias Rook that hot Kansas afternoon, would you have stepped forward and said, "Release her," too?